Just to let you all know, we'll be starting in a couple of minutes, and we invite all those in the foyer to come and grab a seat. If we can squeeze in, I know there are a number more still coming in. Let's make room for others. Thank you. For those who are just arriving, please come on in and join us. We're so glad you're here. We gather this afternoon to celebrate a remarkable life in Nolan Magee, a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a friend, and a great-grandfather as well. We recognise that there are many who have come today from various distances, many who have worked alongside Nolan, perhaps have been told off a couple of times as well. Many who have known him in other spheres of life too. This is your place today. This is Nolan's local church, and you're so welcome here. I served as Nolan's local pastor for a number of years, and I had some great times visiting him. The last time I saw him was when we did a special anointing, and I remember when we walked in, what he said. Kenneth was with me, Jordan as well, and Alistair, and he said, "Come on in, guys, let's get this over and done with." So when it comes to the way Nolan likes to do things with church, I remember the Lord is important to him, but get straight to it. So we're going to honour that style today, and when it comes to remembering a life, we do it by looking to heaven, and at the same time, doing it in a way that honours that person best. So the family have given instructions. They want what happens this afternoon to be filled with jovial memories. we're going to have a time later on where we will have an open mic to hear tributes, memories, stories that you may have from Nolan's life. So don't tell the whole story perhaps, because we do want to have refreshments after. But if you're brave enough, we invite you. You won't have to come all the way up to the front. There'll be microphones shared around, and we would love to hear something special that you hold dear to your heart. Do want to especially recognise the immediate family of Nolan. So we have his dear wife Ruth here. We have his children Lance, Mark, Heather and Paula. And the grandchildren, Lance's, and acknowledging those who may not be here as well, Zachary, Jenny, Sarah, Mary, Grace, Emily, Abigail, Katie and Rachel, Mark's children, Stephanie, Mitchell, Aaron and Alexis, Heather's children, Justin, Cassidy, Travis, Evan, Adelaide, and Paula's children, Kyle and Tamsin. And Nolan's great-grandchildren, Brooklyn, Jacob, Katie, and Nathan. To you all, Nolan continues to live through your influence, through the memories and the things that he's passed on, whether that was by choice or not. But as you listen today, as you share, please know that there is a whole community around you who love, who are supporting you, and as I do invite us to continue to uphold this family in prayer. With all of these names, especially 20 grandchildren, perhaps he should have been called Father Abraham. We're going to hear in a few moments from Pastor Ken, or as Nolan called him, Kenneth, and he will be sharing a message from the floor with us this morning. Before we do that, though, I just invite you to bow your heads with me and let's pray. Mighty Father, we praise you today for the life and blessing of Nolan. Thank you for the memories, thank you for the lessons, and thank you for the way that he has enriched our lives. For 78 years, we're grateful, Lord, and as we listen, remember, we pray that you will give us the spirit of hope and joy in this place. In Jesus' name, let us all say, Amen. Thanks, Pastor Ken. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm probably the person here today who has known Nolan longer than any other. If anyone can beat 74 years, then you can come and do the talking, and I'll sit down. I've known Nolan for 74 years that I remember him, put it that way. He was 18 months older than me, but as long as I can remember, we've always been great mates, great friends, but of course we're also cousins. We can't avoid that. We could have avoided the friendship, but that, of course, just didn't happen. Friendships that last for life are very, very valuable. And I'll miss Nolan, and I do miss him enormously, especially in the last few years when we've lived quite handy, just a couple of kilometres or so away and walking distance. And Nolan and I would get together frequently in his shed or my shed, and my shed was warmer than his shed, so more often than not he came round to my shed, and we'd sit there in the shed. If the sun was shining, we would sit in the sunlight, and if it wasn't, we sat there just the same and shared old times and many other things. We talked about all kinds of stuff, and like old friends do. Some stuff that we talked about I would not talk about today because I consider he's not here to answer as to whether I've got it straight or not. And some stuff is sort of confidential between friends and you don't spread it on again. But we would talk about things of old times, the way we were brought up, our parents. Our parents were first cousins. Two brothers married two sisters. So my mother and Nolan's father were first cousins. So we are first cousins once removed, I think. Is that the right way to put it? So we talk about old times. We had a lot in common. We would talk about the affairs of the world. We'd talk about, in recent times, whether Donald Trump was doing a good job or not. Nolan assured me that he was doing a great job and that he'd get America right in no time. I was adamant in the opposition, but maybe he studied Donald Trump more than I did. So, pardon me. We would talk about things such as the way we should bring up the family. Too late, really, in recent times when we had big discussions on that, because I think we were really talking about our grandkids in the way that our kids were bringing up their kids. A bit different from the way we did it, and no hands-on stuff like we had when we were kids. When you disobeyed, you learned all about it. And slippers had leather soles in those days. Maybe some of you remember that. And we'd talk about religion. Religion was something that came up nearly every conversation we had. Somewhere or other we'd be talking religion. Well, religion to the point as to what we believed, as to why we're in this world, and what's going to happen, where we can go after we've gone in this life experience, and that would cause quite a bit of discussion. Well, of course, I'd been away for some years and went to do theological training, came home again, and then Nolan would ask these questions again when we had these conversations, and he'd say, what do you reckon, why are we here in this world anyhow? And so I'd start to give him an answer and say, I don't want to hear all that theology stuff you've been learning. He said, I want a straight answer. So I'd say to him, well, we're in this world because we had no choice. And no one asked me or you if we'd be born or not. We have no choice. But, in the beginning, the world was a lot different than it is today. And, of course, he agreed. He'd thought these things through. But he also thought it through from the perspective of the Bible. And he had a great respect for the Bible. And although he admitted he didn't understand it all by any means, and I had to admit the same, and I still do, he had a great respect for the Bible, and it was the basis for his life, really. And then one time we were talking about something rather serious. He's saying, why is it that we're so prone to do the wrong thing and say the wrong thing? And I said, you mean the Bible says they call that sin, don't they? Yeah, well, that's what it is, he says. Yeah, that's what it is. And he said, we all sin and we don't seem to be able to help ourselves. And so we discussed that topic. And, of course, the biblical conclusion to that is we sin because it's built into us. And the only way we can get out of it is to seek divine assistance to keep us from being what we might have been. And I said to Nolan one day, what do you reckon you'd have been if you weren't religious? Well, he said, I can only imagine what I would have been, but he said I was far too tight to do what a lot of people do, such as boozing and gambling. So he would have avoided that, no doubt, whether he was religious or not, simply because he wouldn't spend the money. And I suppose I was about the same. I never smoked or drank because in the first instance I was far too tight to spend the money on it. And I'm glad we didn't. Then, of course, the subject of what happens anyhow. We're all going to die. And so he'd discuss with me about what happens when you die. What's going to happen next? Something's going to happen. He said, we're far too important, he said one day, we're far too important to be left just with nothing. And I said, well, you're right. And he said, I understand that when we die, we're asleep, and that's it. He said, I've got no fear of death. And in his last few weeks, Nolan didn't have any great fear of death. I mean, he wanted to be around for the family and Ruth and the grandkids and so on, but he had no great fear of death because he realised the only real explanation for death is that you're asleep. And if you're asleep, you're usually comfortable. And then, of course, we'll talk about what next. And what next, of course, is the Christian hope that Christians have, and that is the hope that there will be a day when the Lord Jesus will return again, and those who have been faithful, respected him, respected his word and instruction to us, have lived the life that would be pleasing to the Lord. The Lord Jesus himself would come, raise them to life again, and give their life back to them. And this has been the Christian hope for over 2,000 years. And I'm not ashamed to say that Christians today still hold that hope. I do, Nolan did, his family do, and we look forward to that time. In the meantime, of course, we're sorry to see our loved ones go. But there's no horror in death as far as death is concerned itself. And so Nolan took these spiritual things, I suppose we would call them, took them to heart, and it paid off in the last year or so when he was having a pretty hard time with his health. And he always had hope. He always was encouraged by the words of the scripture that he remembered himself, or that Ruth brought to him, or the family brought to him, or myself. Our discussions together, as I say, covered all sorts of topics. But I'm so glad that I had that opportunity of spending that time to discussing in depth with him in a simple and rather blunt way the truths of in-depth Christianity. It's of such huge value to one to know where they're going to go when life is over here. We can look forward to something far better than this old world. Nolan was always trying to make the world a better place. He did it by way of bulldozers and motor scrapers. And he had a great respect for the countryside, and he planted pine trees. He did all kinds of stuff to make the world a better place. And when he gets to heaven, I guess he'll be looking around for a bulldozer. I don't know what we'll use up there, but whatever needs to be shaped up there, Nolan will be amongst it. That'll be him. And so I say to the family today, to Ruth and the family, first of all, I should say that I wonder whether Nolan would have been all that he was without Ruth. I remember when Nolan first met Ruth, actually. Have I got 1 minute left? We were at a church convention, and there were two girls sitting on the right-hand side of Nolan and myself and Ralph. And Ralph was pretty bold, you know, and he made some conversation with one of the girls, and then he said to Nolan, "You need to meet this girl here." And Nolan says, "Well, you get out of the road." And so he got out of the road, and Ruth might remember this, or she might not. Her heart was throbbing. Nolan sat right next to Ruth, and there it all started. It was probably only a year later, was it? You were driving a D6 working on the airport, I think it was, something like that. And I remember that very well. Nolan and Ralph tried to match me with someone else whom I had no appeal for whatsoever, but his and Ralph's technique worked marvellously. And Ruth, I think we have to commend you for all that you did to make Nolan what he was as well, and the family likewise. May God bless you all, and may you have hope in your hearts of meeting Nolan again. He'll be disappointed if you're not there.
Thanks, Ken. We're now going to have a special item from Kyle and Tamsin, and this is a hymn called "The Old Rugged Cross," a beautiful story of what Jesus has done for us, for Nolan, and I encourage you to listen for why Nolan liked this song so much.
Wasn't that beautiful? If you turn on the inside of the handout, there is a beautiful verse in the middle there that captures that song very well. And just to apply it to Nolan's life, it reads, "For God so loved Nolan that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him, including Nolan, shall not perish but have everlasting life." We're going to hear a life sketch now, so over to Lance, to Mark, and to Heather. Thank you.
I'm not Charlie. Some pretty major events happened in 1941. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, the US entered World War II, M&Ms and Cheerios were invented, aerosol cans appeared on shelves, and Nolan Magee was born. While the first 5 events were pretty major, it was the last event that had the most importance, at least for me, and without which the earth would have been a much poorer place. Born at an early age in Rawene, in the Hokianga, on October 19, Nolan was the 4th of 7 children born to Clyde and Eileen Magee, but only the 2nd to survive past the age of 2. He was 4th generation Magee in New Zealand and 3rd generation to be born here. His great-grandfather Edward, who was a doctor in Ireland, immigrated in the mid-1800s and taught school in Opanoni. His grandfather Henry, who Nolan was particularly close to, worked all over the North Island building bridges for the railways. Nolan started school in Kaitaia, but his dad, fearing the loss of more children, moved his family to Broadwood when the polio epidemic hit, figuring they were less likely to contract the disease by living in the sticks rather than the big smoke, 1940s version of social distancing. Clyde worked for the county council, driving grader and maintaining roads. Nolan would go with his dad when he could, and I guess this is where he was first exposed to earth moving. In later areas, he came back and did 3 stages of road realignment in the same area. As a boy, Dad went to school in Broadwood, and he told us stories of his hijinks. He had a well-founded fear of the old pedal-powered dental drill and was always trying to outwit the dental nurse. One day he hid in a trolley and got one of his mates to cover him with a sack and wheel him past the clinic. The nurse must have had a tip-off because she was sitting waiting for him on the other side. She stretched his ear and dragged him back to the murder house. The father of one of his buddies had an old car in a shed, and his buddy boasted that it could get up to 50 miles an hour. An argument followed about the capabilities of a car that was so old it still had wooden spoke wheels and biscuit tyres. The only way to settle this was to see it with their own eyes. So up to the shed they went, I think there were a few other curious mates that wanted to see too. As they were only about 9 or 10 years old, none of them had licences, but that didn't stop them. They jacked up the back of the car till the wheels were off the ground, then all piled in so they could see for themselves. The young fellow whose word was on the line did the honours and wound the old girl up. He was changing gears and giving it the gas, just like he'd seen his father do. Dad said the car was doing pretty good. The back wheels were fair humming around, and when they hit top gear, someone wanted to get a better look at the speedo, so they moved up closer to the front. The car was rocking around on the jack, and that was all it took for it to overbalance and fall off. 45 mile an hour to 0 instantly. Dad said the car didn't even move when it hit the ground. It sheared off every one of those wooden spokes and kicked up a heck of a dust storm in the shed. Made a bit of a racket too. Nobody was interested in how far the needle on the speedo went anymore, and by the time the dust settled, there was not a curious eyeball to be found anywhere. Pretty hard to explain what happened when you're dancing around at the end of your dad's belt. Dad and his brother Ralph loved going to their grandparents' farm at Owie. They spent all their holidays there and did stuff with their cousins, Ken Curtis, and with the Kings from across the valley. Riding horses, playing footy, working and going to church. It was natural for some strong friendships to be made, and Nolan became good mates with Norman King. Our families have grown up together over the years and the generations. When Dad's grandfather Henry died, Nolan, who was 12 years old, stayed on the Owie farm to help his grandmother Alice. His main job was milking the cows before and after school. One day he helped Con King take his cattle to the sales. Any chance to ride his horse and not go to school was good enough for him. It was pouring with rain, and they ended up driving the cattle home again, as it was a poor sale. Dad got really sick with what turned out to be rheumatic fever and nearly died. It took months for his recovery and left him with a slight heart murmur. Not long after this, Clyde moved the whole family back to the Clements farm in Kaipara Flats. Alice sold the Owie farm and came to live with them there. Not long after this, at age 14, Nolan finished blessing the education system with his presence, and an arrangement was made for him to work with his dad on the P&T. Every day they drove past big earthworks being done on the roads by McBreen and Jenkins, and the yellow machines held a fascination for Nolan. He bought an old Fordson tractor with steel wheels, and him and Ralph broke in some pretty rough paddocks on the Kaipara farm, disking and putting in a crop of millet against his father's advice, which ended up saving their cows in a drought later that year. Once he turned 15, he approached McGreen Jenkins for a job and started driving a bully. And he got to know Noel Lomas, who was to become his best mate and partner in crime. First job he was at Puhoi. In fact, it is the very same piece of road we are currently upgrading now. It has lasted for over 60 years, so he must have learnt the right way to do it right from the start. He stayed with McBreen Jenkins for a few years, working on some big projects which included the northern approach to the Harbour Bridge, the Waiwera Hill and the Dome Valley. He loved the machines and was a natural operator, picking up the skills and tricks to become a sought-after man for the difficult jobs. He went to work on the Mammoth Mangere International Airport project, and it was there that two very significant things changed the course of his life. He bought his first bulldozer, and he met Ruth Herman. He was 19 years old when he bought the D6, and he was 21 when they lived in a caravan in Manukau, and they didn't muck around because I showed up pretty quick. Most afternoons, Mum would go to the job and give Dad a break, driving the dozer, towing the discs, while Dad had a power nap beside me while I was in my pram. Some days Dad would drive for other contractors when the driver didn't show up or got the sack, so Mum would drive the dozer with me in the toolbox. She reckons I would wake up when the dozer stopped. Always with an eye for something different, it was around this time during the off-season that he built a mobile sawmill. His brothers Basil and Ralph helped him, and along with Clyde they did contract sawmilling around the Warkworth area for farmers and small landowners. After this project, Nolan worked for Huey Green of Green Macahill and moved all around, doing stop banks and subdivisions in Wellington and the Kapuni gas pipeline. In the winter months, he would head up to Kaitaia and plant marram grass and pine trees in the Alperi forest along the 90-mile beach. Eventually, the family moved to live permanently back up in the north. Their family grew, with Mark and Heather showing up to spoil my monopoly. Paula came a little later, and nothing has ever been the same since. A member of the Kaitaia Seventh-day Adventist Church, he supported the church and the school, and I have memories of school trips to his job sites, with him and Mum taking us on campouts with the other kids. Church camp in Ardmore was a highlight for us, and even though it was the middle of the earthwork season, Dad usually made the effort to get us there every year. He would catch up with some of his childhood mates, and I can remember him laughing and telling stories with Norman and Mary Ann King. Us kids got to meet up with our mates, and they just happened to be kings too. A number of people that started out with Nolan went on to have successful business of their own. Kerry Loopy joined up and was a keen young fella. The Ringrose brothers, Owen and Tom, worked with Dad as well. The work was hard, but I remember them having a lot of laughs too. Dad could be a hard man to work with at times, with there usually only being two ways of doing things, his way and the wrong way. Occasionally things had to be sorted out behind the smoko shed, but by and large he was respected and ran a happy crew. One thing was for certain, you always knew where you stood with Nolan. His business grew and he employed family members and others that may not have had work opportunities otherwise. He used his business to help others by giving them the chance to help themselves. Dad got the shell of a boat and he powered it with a truck engine himself. We all helped to sand it down and to paint it. The Lady Ruth it was called, in honour of his real love. Many weekends were spent down the Wangara Harbour, staying at Foster's Batch, or on the boat, catching kohiri off the wharf with a spotlight and a piece of cotton as live bait for kingies, or pulling in kawai when they were on the bite and the birds were working. Dad gave us a rich and interesting life. He was also an avid hunter and took Mark and I on deer hunting trips and gave us an appreciation for the bush and what a beautiful country we lived in. During the mid-70s, Dad got a contract to rebuild the road between Kaihu and Naranga. This took a number of years and we moved to the area, and Dad bought 150 acres of scrub so that he could keep his workers busy in the off-season, crushing and burning the scrub, disking it up for grass and putting in a massive dam. Us kids were of an age to help, and he gave us every opportunity to do so. There was also an adventure to be had and at least one machine to get unstuck or stuck after school. Soon became wary of any invitation to come and drive some machines on the farm, as that usually meant they had to help fix one or at least get it unstuck before any driving happened. Dad gave us jobs and let us make our own mistakes, then tell us how to fix them, and he let us do that too. He was a brave man letting us loose up there, but then we learnt a lot too. Towards the end of the 70s, Dad got tired of paying 60% tax and decided to take up his brother Ralph's invitation to come and check out Canada. Together they started a logging business that would enable us to immigrate. They converted a long-haul highway truck to a logger and added a self-loading log crane to its back. A skidder and bulldozer were added and the small business grew. In 1980, Dad moved us all over. What an exciting time for the whole family. He started another trucking business, and it wasn't long before we found ourselves doing off-highway log hauling in northern British Columbia and Alberta. Us boys learned to drive trucks the hard way, by trial and error, with our errors usually being Dad's trials. It was about this time that his jet black hair started changing to silver. Maybe the many telephone conversations that started with, "We're okay, Dad, but," had something to do with that. As the best time for logging was winter time, we would often go highway hauling in the off-season and spent a number of summers hauling groceries and beer on the 4,500-mile round trip from Vancouver to Whitehorse for the Yukon. One summer we got a job hauling oil rig supplies into Inuvik, Canada's northernmost town, situated 400 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Because Inuvik is built on permafrost, they couldn't put water or sewerage pipes in the ground, and so had them running in overhead pipes. I remember Dad calling me up on the RT one day, saying he had taken a wrong turn in his truck and ended up in a residential area. He got tangled up in the overhead pipes and they had burst. Needless to say, he had to drive at the back until we got to a river and washed his truck down. The oil company we worked for approached him with an offer to pick up the same supplies once the winter had come and truck them 300 miles out across the frozen ocean to the oil rigs themselves. That would have meant forfeiting our regular winter logging job, and so was declined. Mum was less than enthusiastic about the idea and may have had a major influence in that decision. Dad and Mum spent 12 years in Canada, and many friends and family from New Zealand came to visit. Dad enjoyed taking them on trips in his van and tiny caravan. It was on one of these trips with Nolan and Andrea Lomas that they camped in a national park in the States somewhere. The local ranger, doing his rounds in the evening, stopped at their campsite and told them to make sure that they didn't leave any food out, as there was a pretty mean 400-pound black bear wandering around. Noel was heard to comment that it couldn't be that mean if it had let them weigh it. The ranger was not amused. Norman and Marianne King brought their family over, and this was a great time for us. Snowmobiling up in the high country and the frozen lakes. Lots of food and good old Kiwi laughter. Dad enjoyed sharing his new country with his old friends. The frozen roads presented many challenges, one of which was the problem of traction. Trying to get 70 tonnes up or down an icy hill wasn't always the joyous occasion you may imagine. When it didn't happen, the slide backwards down the hill rarely ended well. Dad wondered about having the wheels on the trailer drive too, in order to double the tractive effort. Drawing from his experience in earth moving and owning twin-powered scrapers, he set out to explore this idea. He approached the forestry companies we worked with, and while they thought it may have some merit, nobody was willing to commit to the idea. It was a chance comment to a transport supervisor in Kaingaroa Forest while on vacation in New Zealand that started a 7-year contract and an outlet for Nolan's creativity. Back in Canada with a great idea but no concrete design, Dad began this project the same way he did most things. He started. He bought some steel, a big welder and a warm hat. The main frame was built in the backyard in the snow, with Mum heating the frozen steel with a propane torch so Dad could weld it together. A Kenworth with an unfortunate past donated its innards and the whole thing came to life. Pacific Truck did a customised build and supplied a truck to tow it all. It wasn't without its problems, but they were overcome with the usual Magee dogged determination, and it wasn't long before it was on the boat to New Zealand. It performed well beyond everyone's expectations, and at its peak was hauling 4 trailers at over 250 tonnes into the railhead at Murupara and mills in both Taupo and Kawerau. During the 7-year contract, it hauled over 1 million tonnes of logs and travelled over 1 million kilometres on the off-highway roads. Back in New Zealand, it wasn't long before Nolan took up his first love again, earth moving. He joined forces with Kerry Lupi and formed Blue Mar Contracting. Together they did a number of major road building projects in the far north. The first one being the Whirinaki Hill realignment, which interestingly was only a few miles from where he spent a lot of his youth on his grandparents' farm in Owie. He often pointed out to the pine tree that he and Ralph had tried to burn down on a slow afternoon, and the house that had barely escaped being retired by a wheel they had spent 3 days dragging to the top of the hill behind the house and letting go. A couple more jobs were done with Kerry, and then the company was split up and they both went in their own direction. Dad formed Magnum Construction, and with an old friend from Greenock Hills, Dave Herbison, they got a contract with Downers doing the road at Earthquake Flats out of Rotorua. He bought some bigger machines for the job, and this led to bigger contracts all over the North Island. He realised another lifetime dream and finally bought a D9H bulldozer. It was his baby, and driving the big girl was his form of therapy. I think it is quite fitting that one of the last machines that he ever drove was a D9H at the Wheels at Wanaka show. Wasn't all work for Nolan though. He enjoyed doing things with his family and friends. Quite a collection of quads was accumulated, and some very memorable trips were had in the sand dunes and forest tracks. He was happy to give his grandkids rides, and lots of grass was torn up on his farm and sand thrown around on the beach. I know Zachary in particular loved going with him and hanging on like a limpet. Company trips to Ahipara and Poto as a reward for meeting production targets was something that was enjoyed by a lot of people. Dad loved seeing people have a good time. In later times he enjoyed coming with us on our 4x4 trips up Thompson's Track, and we'd often go home just as muddy as the trucks. With David McKelvey as engineer, they got a start in Solid Energy's coal mines at Huntly. All of a sudden his big machines didn't look so big anymore compared to the giants working there. This part of the company worked out there for 7 years until Solid Energy closed up. Dad and Dave proved to be a good combination, and they won quite a few contracts, multiple jobs being done at the same time. The company grew and even ventured into the South Island. Big Muzz started working for us, and a strong friendship was formed. Dad thought of you as another son, and he sure enjoyed your visits and catching up on the latest gossip. Muzz is currently on loan to CNR. It was while he was working with Muzz on State Highway 1 contract in Taihape that Dad had his first heart attack. A combination of business stress and the damage to his heart from his childhood bout with rheumatic fever was the official cause. Nothing at all to do with the adventures of his kids and grandkids. He had a stent put in Wellington Hospital, and away he went back to work. 5 or 6 years later, after a few more contracts and even more quad trips, on the eve of his granddaughter's wedding, he had another heart episode which resulted in a triple heart bypass. The road to recovery was long and hard and compounded by the failure of Magnum Construction due to the bankruptcy of Solid Energy. 2 years after working for different companies, we were approached by United Civil to do the earthworks on a contract they had won on the Brendurwan Hills. Dad decided it was time for the next generation and gave Mark and I his blessing and support to start progressive earth moving. Mother Nature wasn't done with Nolan yet. His kidneys failed and he had to go on dialysis 3 times a day. While this slowed him down and required some adjustments to how things were done, he didn't let it stop him. Against his doctor's advice to stay home and essentially fade away, he would drive the dozer, and then at smoko times he would set up his steel stand, hook up his tubes and bags and do his dialysis. One day while on the Brens and working by himself, he set up his stuff beside the dozer and did his treatment while sitting on the blade arm. He finished and went to his pickup for something, and a couple of young site labourers drove up. He greeted them and they disappeared around the dozer on foot to do their jobs. A few seconds later they reappeared with eyes as big as saucers and reported to Nolan that someone had set up a whiskey still on the side of his dozer with tubes and wires running everywhere. Dad, being Dad, played along and pretended to scan the area for the villains. He told them these guys wouldn't be happy about the intrusion and were probably not too far away watching from the bush. It was 2 very nervous young fellas that headed down into the scrub to do their environmental controls. As time went on, the demands of his condition grew. Nolan spent more and more time in his acreage at home. He He loved raising his cattle and ploughing up his fields to put in various crops. There was more than one argument or discussion with Mum and Delwyn about what should be planted and what animals should be brought or sold. In the end, he usually did what he decided before the discussion started anyways. He still came out on the jobs when he could and was generous with his advice. He was respected by the crew and helped more than one guy sort out his personal life with his words of wisdom. He wasn't shy to point out the error in your ways and suggest that the answer to most of your problems was probably in God's hands. He was told that kidney patients like him typically lasted up to 2 years, sometimes 3. In typical Nolan fashion, he stretched that out to 6. In 2016, Nolan suffered a stroke while helping Mark price a big job up north. He was admitted to Waikato Hospital stroke ward and was stuck in a room down the hall from a real earth-moving legend, Mike Ross. I think there was more dirt moved in that hospital in those 2 months than our companies did for the whole summer. Thanks, Mike. Dad took a lot of encouragement from you and he admired your attitude and determination in recovering. He enjoyed going down to Cambridge and catching up with you and the boys. He loved seeing what was getting worked on in the workshop and checking out the latest addition to the museum. He hated hospitals and really figured he needed to be there. They were full of sick people. Boy, he said to me one day, when I get to that stage, just take me down the back and shoot me. I wasn't entirely convinced that he was joking. One of the recent highlights for Nolan was a trip to Wheels of Wanaka show in Easter of 2019. The biannual car show incorporated earth-moving machinery for the first time. His brother Ralph had found an old Terex TC12 twin-engine dozer in New York. The Ross boys bought the machine for their museum and it was shipped in time to be one of the stars of the show. Ralph came over and together with Dad, we attended the show. It was a working show where the old girls can go and strut their stuff, as mentioned earlier. One of the highlights for me was to get Dad up into Paul Clark's D9H for a tutu. He was reluctant at first, but was sure happy we made him do it, his huge grin telling the tale. He talked about this event for months, and I know it was very nostalgic for him to see some of the machines working there that he'd been so proud of driving in his and their prime. His medical condition affected him more at times than others, his legs being of particular trouble to him. Some days they would jump around uncontrollably and aggravate him no end. We joked that if we stood him up when his legs were twitching that he would take off running and we wouldn't be able to catch him. The truth though was his legs were getting weaker all the time. On a few occasions we found him jammed under a machine where he had fallen and struggled but couldn't get back up. I think this is one of the things that he found hardest to accept, from being such a strong and self-reliant man to having to help others and to having to have help from others to do the simple things. An Irish temper will only get you so far. Towards the end of last year, the final blow was dealt. He was diagnosed with leukemia and given 6 weeks to live. Of course, he lasted longer than that, if only to prove the doctors wrong. That isn't to say that he didn't need a lot of care. Heather and Delwyn did a fantastic job helping Mum care for Dad under sometimes trying conditions. He would slip into unconsciousness for days at a time and have to have his dialysis done for him around the clock. When he was awake, a lot of people came and said goodbye. Although he would tired easily and would sometimes fall asleep mid-story, he enjoyed the visits and remembering immensely. Thank you all. His brother came from Canada and so did his close friends Norman, Laurie, Treyer. Steve and Tolly made the trip from Australia, all of which would be here today if not for the current debacle we find ourselves in. It was little things that gave him peace. Fish and chips with his brother and sister. Had to be wrapped in newspaper though. His favourite hymns on the piano, even if it was 3 o'clock in the morning. His little dog snuggled up on the end of his bed. One day when I was visiting him, he told me that he had had enough. He was done. He knew that he wasn't going to get better to any state that he would be happy with. He was at peace with God and he was ready to go. I asked if it was time for that walk down the back. A fierce look came in his eye as he struggled to sit up. "Come on then, boy, let's go," he said. In the end, Dad finished his life the same way that he lived it, on his own terms. He didn't want anyone else to feel guilty or ashamed for making the decision to stop his dialysis, so he decided it for himself. 4 days later, he fell unconscious, and 6 days after that, on the first day of lockdown, he left this world and all its troubles and checked out. He left a lasting legacy in the form of 4 children, and along with their husbands and wives, 20 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, and a whole lot of friends. I've only scratched the surface here. He lived enough for 2 or 3 lives, and he still wanted to accomplish more. He was many things to many people, and each will remember him in their own way. But for me, he was my dad.
Oh, there's a lot more out there than at church on a Saturday morning. Dad didn't have a lot of hobbies other than work, of course, but he did like to ride his pedal bike. Whenever on holiday, he would get up early, unstrap his pedal bike and start riding. Mum and whoever else was with them at the time would get up, pack up, and catch up to him, usually 10 or 20 kilometres down the road, sometimes longer if the instructions weren't clear. One day while on holiday in Canada, he braved the Coquihalla Highway, commonly known as the Hell Highway. From its summit, it is 50 kilometres of downhill to the town of Hope, and it was only natural that it needed to be ridden down on his own pedal bike. The top starts above the tree line, and the road has numerous snow sheds to protect drivers from avalanches during the winter. It is renowned for its steep slopes, 12% grade. It's 4 lanes, and periodically there are runaway lanes for trucks who lose their brakes and need an escape route. So you can picture my dad astride his 10-speed road bike hurtling down the side of the mountain. All was going extremely well until he hit the first snowshed tunnel. The beautiful road that snaked down the mountain suddenly disappeared in the tunnel, and in its place was chopped up asphalt, deep potholes from truck chains that used in the winter, and it would have been good to have known the conditions of the road prior to hurtling down the mountain at 90 kilometres an hour. When he hit those holes on his bike with no suspension, he knew his life was in peril. As he retold me the story, I could see the fear relived as he retold the story, I could see the fear relived as he told me how he entered the snow shed and the jumping and jolting that threw his feet off the pedals, the reefing on the handlebars from side to side, wrestling the bike as his life hung in the balance. I was feeling anxious as I relived the story. I could only imagine the feeling of desperation and being completely out of control he must have felt, and impending doom. It isn't good to pass cars going down a hill, even I know that. Fortunately, he made it out okay, but that was Dad, able to deal with whatever life threw at him at full speed and coming out on top. Dad was a complex man. He loved his Lord, he loved his family, he loved his work. He loved machines and moving dirt. Although the smells of diesel and the sound of an engine made his heart tick, he also loved the nature and revelled in its beauty of God's creation. He wasn't into cathedrals or man-made monuments, but he loved to travel and see God's handiwork. Over the years, he has travelled to Australia, Fiji, US, Canada. But he saw the beauty everywhere he travelled, be it for work or for play. And on April 19, we took Dad down for his last trip. He couldn't travel overseas anymore, so we took him down to the South Island. His brother Ralph came along. Around every corner he would say, "Fantastic, wow, beautiful." He was so excited to be there. The purpose of the trip was to go down to Wheels at Wanaka. Dad was like a little boy in a candy store with all those machines. The weather was cold and wet. Dad was covered from top to bottom in rain gear, trundling around on his scooter. But you couldn't have wiped the grin off his face. Walking down memory lane, he found machines that had been new when he was a young fella. Dad's favourite machine was always a bully. It had been arranged that Dad would have a turn on that D9H there. Lance and Ralph lifted Dad up onto the dozer and he happily drove in with all the boys in the sandpit. Dad wasn't for fancy cars and fast things. He had a love of old Bedfords, functional, tidy vehicles. Although sometimes he bought new, it wasn't so he could have the latest and the fanciest. It was because they were reliable. But when it came to his quad bike, the faster the better. He liked the power, the rumble of torque and the whine of horsepower. I have so many memories of Dad out there in the sand dunes coming along for the ride, of camping at Minganui and those legendary bike rides there. He was a regular at Tangawahine rides, the Thompson's track with the 4x4s. That's his quad out the front. But although he loved quads, he loved boating even better. Every time he was out on the boat, he couldn't help himself and he would say, "Isn't this fantastic? We should do this more often." Some of my favourite memories as a child was going out on the boat in the Whangaroa Harbour. I thought it was the only harbour in the world. We spent time fishing, setting the long line, spending time together as a family. It was the only time Dad slowed down. Our wish was to go out for one more boat ride down the harbour and one last fish. I tried on many occasions to get him up there, but his health dictated otherwise. Dad was a visionary, a mover and a shaker. It was his habit to think out of the box, and his philosophy was that there was more than one way to skin a cat. Dad had a quiet confidence in his ability and backed himself. There's a saying that a good idea only works if you do, and that was Dad. He was a hard worker. I remember as a boy, I always got up early, but I seldom beat Dad. It would be Dad and Grandpa off to work at the crack of dawn. His work ethic and understanding of dirt and his ability to get the job done resulted in him being respected within his industry. The secret of his success was asking God for help from day to day running. Who better to ask for help on moving dirt than the real earth mover, Jesus? Dad was known for his methodology and being able to get the job done. His confidence allowed people to trust and respect him. He could foresee problems and head them off long before anyone else knew there was one there. He didn't have a degree, but he knew dirt. Back in the mid-90s, I was privy to his thinking as he priced a job doing the Brenduins. In the contract, there was a small amount of unsuitable material to come out of a gully. Dad said, contrary to the data and the geotech reports, that there was way more than a little mud in the fill area. He said that the road was not slipping on a mere 400 cubic metres of mud, as the contract stated. There would be a lot more. But what would he know with only a year 8 education? What would he know compared to the university degrees of the engineers? But he trusted what he knew and he took the gamble and priced the way he saw it. And 38,000 cubic metres later, he emptied the gully of unsuitable. He told me that he remembered as a kid sitting on an apple box on his dad's grader, grading the country roads, and that piece of road had been slipping way back then, and it wasn't on a little piece of mud. And so he backed himself, and he was right. He truly loved moving dirt and kept on doing it until he was no longer able. Even as Dad Even as Dad lost his health, he could barely walk, he would say to me, "I should be on one of those machines. Just put me up on the bulldozer, boy." Dad loved his family. Dad loved his family, he loved his grandchildren, whether they were biological or not. He took it so hard losing his grandson, Travis. That nearly broke him, but the knowledge that he would see him one day in heaven gave him peace. As children, we knew that Dad loved us and was terribly proud of us. Mum says that he loved to talk about his kids. He would ask her if it was a sin to be so proud of his kids. We felt that pride and appreciation. He was proud that Paula was so good at photography, that she was accomplished at whatever she put her hand to, she excelled at. He loved to tell how when she was a little girl, she would service his Kenworth in Canada, check the oil, doing whatever needed doing. He loved Heather. He loved that how Heather would play the piano for him and played the hymns he loved to hear. He loved that Heather understood his love of animals and that they shared a passion for horses all through their lives, eventually resulting in a very special stallion named Beau, imported from England. Dad could see right from childhood that she was soft-hearted and compassionate, never more so than when she helped him at the very end. Dad was proud of the how responsible Lance was. Even when he was only 13, he had covered for Mum when she and Dad had gone to Canada for 6 weeks, doing the wages and paying the bills. Of how he, as an adult, he had been able to run Progressive and was good at handling the demands of dealing with the books and management. I know that Dad loved each one of us. We felt his love and his pride. He loved being part of our world. Recently, I was looking back through my phone after Dad died, and I was surprised to see how few photos I had of him. Hardly any, in fact. Instead, there were snippets of the job, lots and lots of them, in fact. And when I understood, my phone was full of movies and photos for Dad and not of him. Dad wanted to see and feel part of what was happening, even till the very end. So I would make movies and send them the link, because dirt and diesel was what he lived for. The doctor told him back in November that he only had a few weeks to live, and no doubt Dad would prove the doctors wrong. Dad was tenacious and stubborn. He had a fiery Irish temper. I think it flabbergasted him that his body was giving out on him. He hadn't said it could. At one point, he was sick with not only kidney failure, but the flu. The doctor came to check on him. Delwyn and Heather and Mum had been battling with Dad to take his medicine, but he stubbornly refused. And the doctor not only told him to take his medicine, but also that he needed to go to hospital, and there was no way Dad was going, until the doctor told him that he would be dead by morning if he didn't go. Or possibly the doctor telling him he was a stubborn Irishman helped convince him. It was hard not to laugh at Dad's reaction. Heather said his eyes shot open wide and he nearly sat bolt upright. He didn't want that. Regardless of the temper and his stubbornness, Dad had a real kind side to him. He hated seeing anyone suffer. Anyone always wanted to stick up for the underdog. He had compassion and his ability to see beyond the rough edges of what you were and see what you could be. endeared him to many. He helped when he could he helped when he could and was extremely generous. When he saw someone needed something, he stepped up. This was evident all through our lives by the people who came through our front door, people who stayed with us, lived with us, and who worked with us. He had a special soft spot for anyone who could see past his sometimes gruff exterior, and over the years, a number of guys that worked for us became very special to him. Muzz, Castle, Riley, Steve Williams, Jake, Fozzie, Darcy, to name a few. He had their best interests at heart. He loved Mum with all his heart, and it was always the two of them. I never think of Dad without Mum. He relied on her so much. They were a team. They had been together since they were teenagers and had grown up and into each other. They were each other's rock. Not many people can make it through a lifetime of marriage still in love, but they sure did. She was his Ruthie, his princess. But what I know about Dad more than anything is how he loved his Lord. He was passionate about God and what he had done for him. I know that a lifetime of communion with God, his faith had been strong, but it hadn't always been so. Dad told me about a time he had been struggling whether God cared about him or knew that he existed. He was working up in the sand dunes planting the Albury forest in the late 60s. He had been working with a crew all day, climbing all over the sand dunes, towing a marram grass planter in the wind and rain. And when he parked up that evening, he went to get his 24-inch crescent wrench, only to find it had fallen off at some point during the day. So when everyone had gone home, he started wandering the sand dunes looking for that wrench. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. I remember him telling me as he was discouraged, he fell to his knees and cried out, asking if God cared that he existed, or was he just talking to himself. When he put his hand down to get up, he felt the cold, hard steel of that crescent wrench. His life through, Dad searched to develop his relationship with God, and it was moments like this that built confidence, and it took him from a mere hope to genuine faith. One of my last conversations with Dad, I decided it was time. There was no time to waste, and I needed to hit the important things. Dad didn't look much longer of this world. He was in his hospital bed in the lounge, lying there, frail and broken, a mere imitation of what he used to look like. He was nothing more than a shell, yellow, shrunken, and barely able to talk for more than a few moments. I asked him, "Dad, how are you sitting with your faith?" His answer was nothing like the frail man lying there. "Never stronger," he said. Well, I saw a man lying in that bed, ready to die. He was a man ready to live. His faith in the Almighty was a witness to me, and I left that room at peace, knowing that Dad was completely at peace. Dad had never been one to operate on mere hope. He didn't run his business that way or his life, and he most certainly didn't operate his spiritual life on hope. He operated on faith, rock-solid faith. People have asked if I miss my dad, if I feel his loss. I don't think so. How can I when he has given me so much? He has filled my life with amazing memories. He has made me who I am. I feel him all around me. I have no regrets. We lived, played and worked hard and laughed all our lives. Said what needed to be said and listened, well, sort of, when needed. But I will say this, there are moments at work when something happens that I know he would enjoy and appreciate, and I miss not being able to share them with him. But one day, I know I will. Of that I can be sure. Thanks.
Well, it's hard to follow on from my brothers. They pretty much covered everything. And I didn't write a speech or a big long thing because I didn't think I'd be able to read it out very well. But I do want to say how much I loved my dad. And that the biggest thing I got from him was his love of family. How important we all were to him, and that he was always there for us, even if we'd done wrong, or we'd messed up and gone against his advice or his counsel. We always knew that Dad was there. So this morning I passed the honour of the speaking onto my daughter Cassidy, and she'd often said to me that, you know, when people die, they never really get to hear the good things that people say about them at their funerals. So she put together a letter to her grandpa, and we'd like to share that with you now. Grandpa, excuse me. I don't know where to begin exactly. There are so many memories, so many things I want to say, and I'm not always good with the words or telling people how I feel, but I'm hoping that this will be a chance for me to say a few things. This is a small collection of memories from the perspective of me, Cassidy, which is the name bestowed upon me by you, Grandpa. You were such a huge part of how close our family has been growing up. You've always been about family, and because of that, we've been able to grow up with the blessing of being close with our aunts and uncles and cousins. I don't remember the first time I met you, Grandpa, but I know from photos that it was very soon after I was born. And growing up with grandparents that were so involved in our lives, I guess I just took for granted what a privilege that was, but not anymore. Some of the earliest memories I have of visiting you at your job sites, and it was so exciting getting to come into the workplaces, as we would almost always get to ride on some piece of machinery, whether it was a dump truck, digger, bulldozer, or motor scraper. It didn't matter. We just loved being able to hang out with you, and there aren't a lot of kids these days that get to have these experiences, but thanks to you, we did. I have a photo I've always loved, even more so now, and the photo is of you at work holding my little hand and carrying my favourite doll in the other. I think it was awesome that you were the kind of man who was man enough to be ever so comfortable in front of all your workers to be carrying your granddaughter's dolly. You've always been a busy man, working long hours, but I appreciate the time you would take to create the moments and memories that I carry with me today. When my brothers and I were younger, one of the highlights of the year was to have you and Grandma visit. Waiting seemed to take an eternity, and when we were finished helping Mum prepare for your arrival, we would be on the trampoline, which was right where we could see the road, and we would watch and wait till we saw the little cloud of dust in the distance, and then we would jump on our bikes or ponies and race up the road to meet you. I'm quite sure you drove extra slow just to give us time to get there, or maybe you were just savouring the last moments of quiet before being bombarded by our excited chatter. Christmas is one of those times of years that I have always loved, especially when it was with the Magee clan. You and Grandma would get everyone together at your place, and we would begin with presents, and then breakfast, and preparation for the awesome Christmas lunch would begin after that. We would all enjoy so many laughs and plenty of time together with our cousins, playing and getting into plenty of mischief. You would often join in at some point, getting into whatever game we had going, usually something noisy, and so much laughing and happy screaming. When we needed to settle down, you would bring out your stories of your childhood growing up in the far north, your early years driving machines, and your time logging in Canada, and we would all sit there wide-eyed and enthralled by your tales, you could tell. It makes me laugh just remembering some of them. I especially love the stories about you and your horse, and I'm sure they had a bit to do with my love of horses from a young age. You were often there to encourage us in whatever we were passionate about. For me, that was horses and music and my calf club calves. You came along to all my special events and watched me and my calves at Calf Club, listened to my latest bits of music that I'd been learning, and came along to a couple of horse shows. Some of these things I would never have been able to do without your help, and you would buy the calves for Calf Club, and then they'd go live at your place when they were weaned. When I was 14, you helped to buy a horse float that we could use, which enabled me to attend pony club and shows, and I will forever be grateful to have been able to do this. Quad trips were a family highlight. You would organise these adventures to be along some beautiful New Zealand beach, and these expeditions usually involved most of the family and a number of friends. It was usually an overnight thing, and we were always excited being able to get together with our cousins, aunts and uncles. These get-togethers would usually involve a big feed and lots of laughs and stories. You made sure everyone had a good time, and we would most often get a turn riding on a quad at some point. You even bought a little 50cc quad, which was affectionately named Bumblebee. Many of us cousins, me included, learned to ride and to love quads because of Bumblebee. And when we began to get too big for that, there was the 90, and those poor bikes went through a lot at the hands of all of us, but I'm so grateful for the fun times they provided. There have been a lot of birthday parties and family gatherings hosted at your house. Often when the food was over and everyone was sitting around talking, you would get out your piano accordion and start playing some lively tune, which would have all us cousins dancing and running around the room. Another of the fun games you made was one where you'd sit in your chair by the kitchen door and hold up a small mattress or a broom handle, and my cousins and I would race down the hallway trying to jump over it. You would adjust the height to suit our various ages and size. No one ever had to feel left out of the fun, and it was yet another way to give us an outlet for our endless energy. And I just want to say thank you for putting up with all the noise. When I was 9, you got a job in the South Island building a road. And the neat part of having grandparents work on the roads meant that we had a place of accommodation we could use as a base for a number of family holidays. I have many fond memories of this particular place, staying in the cookhouse with you and Grandma. Dad did a bit of driving for you, and we kids enjoyed adventuring around the countryside nearby. There was a big hill in front of the cookhouse, and you provided us with some old tyres which we dragged up there with much effort to the top. It was so funny watching them bounce their way down the hill and left us rolling in the grass with laughter. It made it worth all the effort. We did a lot of fun things on that trip, sliding down the little hill near the house on a piece of cardboard over and over again, and towing each other behind the quad, playing in the creek nearby and kayaking down the Buller River, exploring train tunnels, lakes and parks. And then there was the endless supply of large bumblebees we were constantly warding off. These fuzzy little critters seemed to be particularly partial to the portaloo, and in the morning it was cool, and it wasn't uncommon to have one's visit to the toilet interrupted by the buzzing coming from under the seat, thanks to some unfortunate bumbler who'd managed to get inside when the door was being opened the day before. An amusing but somewhat terrifying memory. I remember a particularly funny moment during the South Island trip where there has been a big drought and a lot of sheep and those rather dry paddocks were munching on, I'm not quite sure what. And you were driving along and rolled down the window and yelled at the top of your lungs, "Hello, sheep! What are you eating out there?" Justin, Travis and I were in fits of laughter, and for many of the following years we continued the legacy of yelling out the window at the sheep as we drove by. Another cool place that you worked was Tirau, and it was amazing to see the huge rocks full of fossilised seashells so far above sea level. You brought one of the large boulders back to your property in TK, and to this day the grandkids and great-grandkids enjoy climbing it, although I'm quite sure that wasn't what it was intended for. We were always so proud of the fact that you'd worked on and built so many portions of road around New Zealand. And we children would often boast about how our grandpa had built this piece or that piece of road. When you got sick with your first heart attack, the whole family was there within days to be by your side. And although we were worried and the circumstances were less than ideal, we did all have a good time getting together as a family. It just went to show how you could always get your family together in sickness or health. To me, this has been a great comfort, knowing that I had this whole big family who could rally around whoever needed help and be there for each other. When I got married, Jordan and I didn't have anywhere we could afford to live, so you and Grandma lent us your big caravan to do up and live in, and it was a total lifesaver and such a neat time in our lives. It was exceptionally cool because you and Grandma had lived in it, and so had my parents when they were younger. Whenever times seemed tough or I didn't like my living arrangements, I would remind myself of all the places you and Grandma had lived, and I would tell myself that if you guys could do it, we could too. Now I'm a mother of 3 amazing kids, and I'm so grateful that they have been able to meet their great-grandpa and that I have all these memories I can share with them. I'm thankful that they get to be a part of this family. There are a lot of other things that I could say, but I don't want to make you more sleepy than you already are. I guess all I really want to say now is, Grandpa, I love you from your Casadino. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, Cassidy, Mark and Lance. It's so moving that for a man who literally moved the earth for his family, it's very clear that his family continue on that legacy and will move the earth for him to continue his story. And the bulldozer outside is a perfect example of that. Lance drove it up this morning. A nice slow drive from TK would have been quite a sight for everyone on the road, and just a beautiful sight of what continues on today. We're going to see just a video life sketch as well now, so just enjoy the photos. It goes for about 7 minutes, and continue to remember the man Nolan is. What a life. We're going to open the floor now, and we'd love to hear stories, any memories that you may have of Nolan. And we hadn't primed anyone to go first, but I have asked Kyle and Jordan if you can just assist, or maybe Kyle and Alistair, just with some roaming mics. Here's Jordan here. So if you have something you'd like to share, you can raise your hand, you can make your way to the front. These two will be on the side tiers. And thank you so much.
Well, after all that, makes one a bit tearful. Nolan and I are a bit alike with our emotions. But anyway, here we go. I'm Val Clone. I'm Nolan's youngest sister. My other sister is sitting here, Colleen. Nolan was 15 and living at home with my parents and sister Colleen on the farm in Kypra Flats when he was horrified to hear of my impending arrival. And he stated he was going bush. However, he didn't, and actually was the one to come up with a name for me that everyone agreed on, Valerie Allison. The family moved to Warkworth when I was 4, and I have vague memories of big brothers Basil, Nolan and Ralph turning up at home. When they got together, they'd start spinning yarns, and there would be much hilarity and laughter. They'd laugh till they cried. Their mirth was often at someone else's expense, often our dad. Nothing has changed over the years, just that the stories got taller and their memories got longer. They were very clever young men, and the things that they achieved were mind-blowing. Our mum and dad were very proud of their family, and I can remember Mum would always cook up a storm to feed her fine boys and their families whenever they popped in. I loved it when they came to visit, although their children used to be annoying. I'd be told to look after them and let them play with my stuff. Well, that never ended well. That Lance and Mark, no respect for their auntie, and they still haven't. My mum loved her boys, and I can still see her play fighting with them, and one time giving Nolan a beating with the dish mop. She was the family's centre pin. Sadly, we lost her when Nolan was, he would have been 33-ish and I was 18. The following year, our eldest brother Basil died at only 39 years of age of the big C. We were all devastated. So the family changed somewhat, but still remained together. Nolan was the eldest now, and he was always ready to help out if needed. He was a kind, if somewhat gruff sort of a fella with a heart the size of Texas. My brother Ralph would have loved to have been standing up here with us, but it wasn't to be. He especially has felt the loss of Nolan being so far away. They had many adventures together and put together some amazing ideas that were world firsts. It seems so unreal that Big Bro is gone, but he will remain with us in our memories and hearts, and thankfully there are so many pictures and videos and stories. Maybe meet again. He will be missed. Thank you.
On that note, I think it would be appropriate to play a video from Ralph. And if you're planning to share something, you can just raise your hand or come forward after. Thank you.
Go.
Hi, up. Well, here we go. Hi from Canada to all those that are at the celebration of life. I'd love to have been there. I really would have been, but this COVID thing has knocked us all around. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to one day meeting up with Bro again. And wish you all well. And See you in the morning. Wave it out. Okay? Go.
Anyone else would like to share? Feel free to raise your hand or come forward. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Mike Ross. I was a friend of Nolan's, and unfortunately, the pair of us had our mishaps medically about the same time, and I had to spend time in hospital with Nolan, and every day we'd have a site meeting. And there'd be dirt moved you couldn't believe. The history was unbelievable. Even then I thought, Nolan's got to write a book. But I guess that won't happen now. And the doctors would come round looking for us, and he'd call us the two strokes, want to know where we were. And there was only one thing there that brassed me off a little bit, Nolan. I'd be wanting there to be, I couldn't roll myself over, and I'd just have to get a nurse to help me. And he'd yell for a nurse, and no one would come, no one would come. So they gave me this button to push, and I'd push the button, and guess where all the nurses came from? Out of Nolan's room. He had a monopoly on them. And but he was just such a great guy. We had a lot of talks and fun together in hospital. And he was just such a great man to talk to, and all the stories, it was very good. It gave me a lot of help. And then Lance said that Nolan thought Muzza was part of the family. Well, I got some bad news, Nolan. Since you've gone, mate, we've adopted him, all right? So we'll leave it at that, and God bless you, mate.
Hi, how's it going? My name's Jake Mosley. I met Nolan 10 years ago now, when Magnum was running. And we've done a few jobs between the coal mine in Maramura and the log yard at Marsden Point. And I think we finished off at a Carry doing the water reservoir for Fonterra up there. And me being young and not exactly well behaved, it was a pretty rough year. I was working with Nolan there, but and then Magnum, I think Magnum went broke towards the end of it, so I went my separate ways for a while, and I think it was 3 years later, I ended up doing a subdivision behind Nolan's house in Tikawata. And I didn't actually know that was his house at the time until I went to work one morning. Here comes this old guy down on a quad bike. He yells my name out. And, hang on a minute, I remember you. And we went over there and had a bit of a chin wag, and funny enough, he'd been keeping up an eye on me and what I'd been doing for the last 3 years, and not being around. He knew exactly every answer I had. So, you know, for a guy like that to keep an eye on a young fella that never really behaved himself when I was young, I was quite appreciative of that. And then 4 years ago, I flew in from Australia and visited Ruth and Nolan first thing in the morning as soon as I got off the plane. And I need a job. I said, right, you start Monday. I said, the boys aren't probably going to be happy with me, but we'll see how we go. But sure enough, over the last 4 years, we've done quite a few jobs now. And one of the memorable ones for me would be the little subdivision we done, Crystal Mountain, over in West Auckland. Me and Nolan spent a lot of time on that job with just me and him, so there was plenty of nights and yarns talking, and he could never stop talking about that twin-powered logging truck. Always grateful of that thing. So many stories, and I definitely appreciate what Nolan's taught me over the years and helped me grow up and be the man that I am today. and I always enjoyed Ruth and Nolan's visits, especially on the last couple of jobs we've been done now and come up. Although there was the odd conversation through to Lance that you might need to come and get Nolan off his dozer. He's just gone from your road with the rippers down. So, you know, that's going to be sad to see him go and not see the visits anymore. I think that's going to change things a lot, but at least we know the company's doing very well, and I very much respect the man himself and for teaching me the things that I know now. Like he always said, you better ask for forgiveness than permission sometimes. So works well on the jobs these days. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name's Norman King. I'm a sook. I'm glad Mark had a bit of a cry there. You fellas are human. I saw Lance up there. He's as staunch as a thing, and I thought, gee, how am I going to carry on? So, we're way back, not 74 years. How old am I? 42, so somewhere there. Yeah, anyway, we'll carry on. No more lies, it's church. We were talking last night with the boys, and I don't know whether to call her Mrs. Magee, like I've always been brought up that way. I feel uncomfortable calling her Ruth. Maybe I'll call her Mum. Is that all right today? Okay. We were having a chat last night, and I remember Mark saying to me, man, I'm so uncomfortable talking up the front in church, because, you listen to them by the table, and, man, they just don't stop. And then this morning I woke up and I thought, I better write something down, because Mark said he writes things down and then he reads it and it might be 5 words and then that's all he says, and so there's nothing on. So I tried to write things down and it just wouldn't come to me, Mark, and I thought, okay, what does that mean? But here we go. We were... Dad and Nolan were good friends, grew up together from Rawani, that's where they were. Obviously with Pastor Ken as well, he lived just down the road, and we were lucky to meet up with them. We used to have holidays together, we had big camps together, and that's where we grew up. Morris, my older brother, he was mates with Lance, and then Mark and I were the mates, and you can see why we were the mates, because we were the better looking two, you know what I mean? And, it still shows today. I found this big sack to cover it, but I brought the wrong jacket, but never mind. Then the second ones, we're the second oldest in our family, and, we're the better ones. And then along came these girls, and there was Heather, and then there was that Paula or something. Yeah, she was the younger one. I don't know how much younger you are than us, but anyway. Mate, I don't know how you did it, because Mr. Magee, Nolan, man, I used to be scared of him. But I don't know why. He wasn't grumpy with us. He was good to us. He did anything for us. But I used to be scared of him. And he used to ask us to come and stay with them and come and drive bulldozers. Well, mate, I hate bulldozers. As in, I love watching them, but there's no way I want to get on them, God gave me feet, not tracks. You know what I mean? And anyway, so I used to pretend that I wet the bed, and so, Mum, I can't go because I wet the bed. My brother went, and he's driving this bulldozer, never driven them before, and then Nolan Magee, Mr. Magee gets up and he whacks him on the back of the head as he's driving these bulldozers and stupid things like that. Then I got a bit older, and we sort of went through a stage where we didn't see each other much. But as friends, we always knew we had each other's back, okay? And again, I'm talking with Mark now. We always knew we had each other's back. And I used to see a lot of Nolan and Mark, in the sense that he was loving with his children and things like that. Lance, he had so many children, I couldn't keep up with them, and I always felt inferior to him. Not because of all the children's, but So anyway, with Nolan, he used to come down and visit. Nolan and Ruth used to come and visit us all the time, and we loved it. And I don't know what to put my hand on it, but I think what I loved about it was everything that he did was with Ruth. Everything he did was with that he talked about was his family. And then you look now that he's got 20 grandchildren. I didn't realise you fellas were so well at breeding, you know. I thought us kings were pretty good, but you fellas are even better. You know, we started with 18. How many of you fellas start with 3? No, you didn't. Okay, so, you know, so I look back and I go, you know, he was really kind. I remember we asked him to come and do a job for us down at Pioneer Highway. And he said, yeah, okay, digger, you know what I mean? So out turns a 50-ton digger, you know what I mean? And then you say, oh, you know, need 10 litres of diesel, you know, and then unrolls these big, huge diesel, trailers and things like that. So everything he did was huge. And I remember we did the job, and, well, he did the job, we watched. Okay, remember we said to him, what do we do with all this rubbish? There was a car there and there was all sorts of things there. And he said, mate, dig a hole. And we said, true. And he says, yeah. So he digs this huge hole, throws the cars in, all the rubbish in and things like that, covers it up, and we sold that place for good money. You know what I mean? So I think I'm going to go back and I can point out where the flipping thing is. There's a bit of a rise there, yeah, because it wouldn't crush down enough. But when we went to pay that bill, and that's the kind of guy that I remember, not because we didn't have to pay the bill, but was because the heart was the stories. I wasn't lucky enough, but I know this helped, was when our brother died, our mum couldn't go there. I just have to look at that dog, yeah. Okay, my mum couldn't go there, come over to Australia to see Carl, bury Carl. She was too crook. And so my younger brother, or all of us went over. And Mum, they had a memorial service or whatever they called it. Well, it was a funeral service there. And Nolan and Ruth turned up. And my children said to me, Dad, who's the funny? He is so kind. He'd get up and he'd tell a story. He'd forget what he's telling and he'd admit it and then carry on and tell another story. But that's the love that he showed to our family. And so, yeah, I'm going to miss him. I do miss him. You know, I love you, Ruth. Mum, whatever I'm going to call you. I won't say I love you, Lance, but, you know, yeah. Okay, yeah, it's a man love, yeah. Now, appreciate the time that we've spent together, especially in the last, you know, couple of months that we've seen each other a little bit. Mark, we're always mates, you know, I'm not saying we're not mates, but we're always going to be mates, and enjoyed seeing you with your family. To Heather, you know, was, you know, like I said, you know, it got prettier as we, you know, as they went down, and I wasn't tough enough, mate, to take on Nolan, you know, mate. I'm not saying that I was after your wife, but you know what I mean. Where did that come from? Man, I hope someone's coming home with me in my car with my wife. I've been married 38 years or whatever, yeah. No, and then there's Paula, and like I say, you know, Paula, you were younger than us, and so we didn't really think, but always appreciate you guys. I love coming to visit, and last night was pretty cool too. Love you, Zay.
I'm Darcy. Known Nolan since 2003, so been quite a while. Came back to Nolan's place November, and I'd been away for a while doing different jobs and whatnot. Left the Magnum company for 7 years and came back to Progressive and walked into Nolan's house and it was like I'd never left. So he, it's hard, you know, look at the smile. I remember back when I first started up in Whangarei, 18-year-old, came over from Dargaville. Went to the job and seen Mark and went there and said to Mark, I said, oh yeah, I can kind of drive a digger. And he's like, oh, we're looking for scraper drivers. I was like, oh yeah, driven Dad's one around the yard but never really done anything in it. And Phil Foster, sitting over there in the back corner, he he took me on under his wing to teach me what I was doing after Mark scared the heck out of me going down the hill. And Phil said, whatever you do, if you see a white-headed fella turn up in a Toyota Hilux, he says, if he throws his hat on the ground, make sure you do not stop. One day coming down the hill, I seen the hat go on the ground, but I don't think it was for me, I think it was for Riley. Riley was there as well. So I carried on up the hill, and yeah, don't think I went to Smoker that day because Nolan was still there, but then I discovered the easiest way to get Nolan to talk to you was to have extra sandwich in your lunchbox. Yeah, so I got tons of memories from being around and with the family and whatnot, and fortunate enough to have his first great-grandchild, Brooklyn. And yeah, so gotta miss you, Nolan. Thanks.
Hello everybody, I'm Robert, I'm from Dargaville, and my memories with the Magee family, with Paula and Heather, Lance and Mark, started in about 1976, 77, somewhere around that time. And yeah, as we used to attend church together, we got to know them better and better, and then we were often invited up to the Magee household on Sabbath afternoon. And once the sun set, it was the open fire was lit, of course, kept us warm, but all the furniture was spread aside to the corners of the room, and then it was on the mat wrestling time. Tag wrestling. Can you remember those days, boys? Good memories. But the memories I have of Nolan was, yeah, he wasn't a big man in stature, but he surely made up in character. And I admired his tenacity and his get up and go. You know, he never let anything hold him back or hold him down. And if he was down, he wouldn't stay down for long. He'd always get back up and have another go. He was a man, and I would say had guts. And over the years, we got to know them well until they went to Canada, and unfortunately our friendship sort of drifted apart for a while, and we all sort of moved on. But once my wife and I, Kim, got married, and we were beginning to start our family, we were going through some tough times. We were in drought, we were dairy farmers, the cows were dry, and Nolan and Ruth invited us over to see with them at the Brendurans. And we were about to head home, and they always, as they always did, insisted we stay the night. And that's where the generosity of Nolan came out to me. When got up early the next morning, 5 o'clock, we were all up bright and early. They had work to do, and I had cows to tend to. And Nolan, we're having a cup of tea, and Nolan sidled over to me and he says, "How you doing, boy?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm doing fine." "No, but how are you doing?" And I says, "No, I'm doing all right, yeah." "How you strapped for cash?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm doing all right." "Yeah, I'm right." And he says, "Well, don't you let those kids of yours go hungry." And he was always said, "You come and see me if you run short." I'll never forget that. And then a few years, I'll back the truck up a bit here. There was a time when Lance came back from Canada to New Zealand, and he was staying with me. And I always admired Nolan too for his love for his family and his loyalty, extreme loyalty to his family. And whenever he came back to Canada, he'd always be skirting about what the kids were doing. And he always spoke very highly of them. And I always thought, wow, I wonder if my dad speaks like that about me, you know. But I remember one time Lance was staying with me out at the farm, and the phone rang, or he rang his dad. And this was something that was quite unusual in our household as I was growing up. But as he ended his phone call with his dad, he says, "Yeah, I love you too, Dad." and that really cut a heartstring for me. Excuse me. But, and I always thought, if I could be half the man or father that Nolan was to you guys, I'll make a good dad. And I never ever not tell my kids. I always tell my kids, whenever I see them or say goodbye to them, I love you. And it started with Nolan. Yeah, so anyway, as time progressed, and he always offered me a job, but I was always on my own tangent, and was trying to conquer my own mountains. But there was another period of time we went through tough times, and he came up to me again, and he says to me, "How are you off strapped for cash?" And I says, "No, I'm doing all right." No, he says, "How much money do you need?" And I thought, oh, here's a go. "How much money you got?" And he says, "Well, you tell me how much you need first and we'll go from there." So yeah, he was a very generous man, a loving man and a loyal man to his family, and very admirable, and a gutsy man too. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to know your dad.
Yep. Now, I first seen Nolan about 1958, I suppose it was, or 59, and I was working for McBreen Jenkins, and we're doing the road just out of Warkworth, and Nolan was waiting there to get picked up to go to work. He lived out the back of Kuiper Flats somewhere, and he used to stand there watching us every morning while he was waiting to get picked up. Anyway, a couple of months later, he turned up at McBreen's, and I said, "I remember you," and he said, "Yeah, that's what got him going." His father went and seen Jack McBreen, and he turned up at our job. And one of the first things that happened, me and Nolan got put together on a job. We had an old D8, and he had D4 number 5, and we went and did a serpentine pit. And Jack McBreen said, "Only thing making any money here is the 8 and scoop. It makes all the money. We could keep it going from daylight to dark, and through all your smokers and lunches." So we did that, and Nolan, we used to swap over at lunchtime, and someone boiled the billy, and that's how we carried on. Anyway, we had some big money too, big pays, because all those long hours when it didn't rain. And one of the first pays, I see Nolan examining it, and I said to him, "What do you think of the job now, mate?" And he said, "Oh, man, I didn't think we were going to get that much." And I said, "No." And he said, "I'd do this job for half as much as that." And I said, "Me too." And Nolan said, "Don't tell Jack." And I said, "No." Anyway, we worked together all around that Puhoi area. We did Silverdale, we did Wairua Hill, Shadowways Hill, up to by Wellsford out to Port Albert, and we did another job out at Matakana Lee, a subdivision. And there was a couple of seasons we worked together and got on fine. In those days we had no diggers like you fellas, Lance, and we had to do everything with the D4 and the D8. If you made a mistake, there's no way to clean it up. Anyway, what happened? Well, we went to Mangere Airport then, about 1961 or 62, and Nolan went down there, and that's where he started with his machine, and I went down there too because I was going with my wife then, and she lived in Huntly, so that was another season we put in. And then in the end of 1962, December, I got married, and Nolan was my best man, and a week later, Nolan Ruth got married, and I was his best man. So then we didn't see much of Nolan after that, and he went up north for a while, and then he went to Canada. When he went to Canada, he came back to see us and say, "You guys have got to come over here for a holiday." So over we went for 3 months. We had over there and had a great time. And then Nolan came back a couple of years, and he came back and he had a photo album and showing us where he'd been down to America. So, okay, we went over and had a holiday with him right through America. And while we were over there, we did one of the things Nolan always wanted to do, and that's go through the cat factory. Because he always used to say when he worked on the machines, when he used to service them, he'd read whether, "I got to go there one day, mate." And I used to say, yeah, whatever. I never thought it'd end up, but we got there. That's Nolan for you. And then we went, next time we went over to America about 2005 with Nolan and Ruth and did another holiday. And one good thing about Nolan, he'd take you right out in the sticks. You never knew where you were going to end up at night. And one night we ended up there and way out in some camping ground, but nobody was there. She was all closed down. And it was getting late, getting dark, and we stopped there anyway and parked up. And then later on I was getting ready to go to bed, knock on the door, and there's Nolan. He had a hunk of steel in his hand. He said, "You might need that tonight, mate." And I said, "Why?" He said, "I just been out there and read in the sign. We're not supposed to be here. This is all closed down from bear activity." And I said, "Well, we can't go. Can't go anywhere now. Anyway, we've got to stay here." And he said, "Yeah." He gave me a hunk of steel. Anyway, that's Nolan. He always made sure his friends were safe. You know. Yeah. So anyway, I was fortunate enough to see Nolan. He came up and stayed with us in Whangarei just after Christmas and that. And I told him that you enriched our lives, mate. If it wasn't for you, I would never done those holidays over there to Canada and America. We wouldn't have had the guts to do it on our own. Thanks for that, mate.
Hi everyone, my name's Foz. My dad was Nolan's first cousin, and when I was a little fellow I used to be a bit of a rat bag, and I was taken up to Kairoa to another uncle and auntie. Then I ended up with Nolan, and he had a brand new workshop in Kairoa, and we went around there, and this nice new bulldozer got it all painted, and Uncle Reg hopped on it and never put the boards down on the concrete floor. And he went, well, put it in a bad way, give him a good tune up, and I took off back across the road, and Nolan came after me. And I said, well, I wasn't staying with Nolan. And he took me back, and then we went up to the quarry, and all the kids were there, and Ruth. And I said, oh, this is good. And then he had was it an orange ute, Lance? And then we took off down to a job in the back of the place here where our bulldozer was broken down. And we fixed the hose, and he said, hop on it, and away you go, pushing out for a little while. He says, come on, we've got to go south. So we went south, and he stopped down on the tar seal road there, and he put me in the seat. He said, you can drive all the way down to Nolan's mum's place. And I drove all the way down there, and I shouldn't have been even in the seat, because I could only just see out over the steering wheel. And yeah, and we got there at Nolan's mum's place there, and this lovely old lady, she's standing on there, give a big hug. And then we stayed here for a little while. He said, oh, I'm going to take you to another place. And there's some big satellite dishes, what I called them, and there was someone else there. And there was this pretty little girl over there, long, wavy hair. And I think everyone knows who she is. And yeah, and that's when I had my first with Nolan, and he put me on the straight and narrow, gave me a little tweak around the ear one day after that. And then we sort of disappeared for a little while. And then he was come back from Canada, and he was working over towards Kaikoai way there. I started on the scrapers. And then I stayed with him for quite a while and disappeared. We had a few little ups and downs, and he still put me in the straight and narrow, got me back 2 or 3 times, and I wasn't expecting that. And yeah, and I had a real good time with him too. We had a great time until he sent me south again down to the two boys. I'm pretty sure it's set up, but I won't go there either. And then we're training a few young fellas. Darcy's one of them, Aaron's another one, and then there's big fella that United Carriers Yard, wasn't it, Mark? And and I thought, well, what's he going to do? And he come along there and he hopped on the scraper and a few other things here, and that's young Muzz over there. I'm still not too sure if it's one of Nolan's boys too, because they were pretty close. Then we were good mates, Grant, we all worked together, and it was a great time. I'd like to say a few more things, but I didn't get up in my dad's one, so I find this pretty hard. And Ruth, you're such a lovely lady. And, the amount of times you and Heather come up and brought tea up to the machines at night, sitting on the road, having tea, and Nolan was smiling away when he seen everybody, and your 3 kids. Yeah, it was just great times. And I enjoyed being on the truck with you too there too, but not with the chain. So, yeah, and thanks very much.
Well, last time I came down to Tikawara, I'm Nolan's sister, and we were much younger than him. We were just the afterthoughts. And I was always very proud of my 3 brothers, and they all worked as a team, and they were always building something new and something fixing something, and whatever it was, it had to be the biggest and the best. And I can remember they took me on a snow trip, and Dad had an old Comet truck, and off we went down there to the snow trip, and they had built a sledge with, it was like a trike with three skis, and you had a steering wheel in the front. And they were up on the mountain with this mighty sledge, which was bigger than anyone else's and faster than anyone else's, and they'd be taking it further up and further up until it was flying off through the air, but they forgot to put an elastic on the front. And so when it flew up in the air, the front skis would go down. And I can remember them hurtling through the air, and there'd be lots of shouting, look out, we're coming through. But Nolan was always very generous, and I can remember as a child, he bought me my first watch, and I was so proud of it. I kept it for years, and even when it stopped going. And then he said, you ought to go over to Canada. And he said, I've got this Dodge Ram over there with a bed in the back. And so he sent us off over there, and we had the most wonderful 5 weeks over there, and met up with the other brother, and it was just great. We went about 4,000 Ks in this thing. We gave it a oil change or something, and off we went. And but he was always he sent down. He said, "Your place needs ditches," and so he sent Philip or someone down to dig ditches. And it's made a great big difference. And but the last visit we had him was really wonderful, and looking at all the beautiful photos and talking about all the old times, because we were on the farm, and there's old vehicles that we had, and how they were inventing things. I remember when that snow trip we went on, we got down there and when it came time to come home, the wipers stopped. And it was raining a storm and you couldn't see a thing. And so what to do? The old comma truck had those wipers that swung from the top. And so they fixed it. They fixed it. They attached a piece of string this side and attached a bit of string this side, sat me in the front and they'd say, pull, 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 pull. And that's how they got to see where they were going. And I can remember getting sore arms. But we live now up at Tangwahine Valley and we've got quite a lot of animals. And as Nolan got ill, it was very difficult for us to leave the animals and come. I've got too many. Anyway, I'd like to thank Heather and who were the other ones? Heather and Delwyn and Paula and the boys for their care that they gave him, because it was difficult for me to come down. And at the last time I visited him, we had a good time. And he looked around and he said, I'm not afraid to die. But he said, you folk, get your lives together. I want to see you there when I want us all to be together again. So that's it.
Thank you all for sharing, and thank you for listening as well. We're going to sing with a hymn, another one of Nolan's favourites, to close off before Pastor Ken seals us off with a closing prayer. But I would really encourage you to hear the plea that Nolan continues to have. Just as we just heard, he says to us as well, you lot, what are you going to do with your life as well? Live your life to the full. Take time to create special memories with your loved ones, just like he did. Work hard, and don't ever forget that God is big enough to sort out anything that you're dealing with. On that note, we're going to sing this hymn, Under His Wings. If you don't know it, you can just sing along with the words that are on screen. And thank you, Evie. Let's all stand together. Thank you. Under his wings I am safely abiding, though night deepens and tempests are wild. Still I can trust him, I know he will keep me. He has redeemed me and I am his child. Under his wings, who from his love can sever? Under his wings my soul shall abide, safely abide forever. Under his wings, what a refuge in sorrow, how the heart yearningly turns to its rest. Oft when the earth has no balm for my healing, there I find comfort and there I am blessed. Under his wings, who from his love can sever? Under his wings my soul shall abide, safely abide forever. Under his wings, oh what precious precious enjoyment. There will I hide till life's trials are o'er. Sheltered, protected, no evil can harm me. Resting in Jesus, I'm safe evermore. Under his wings, who from his love can sever. Under his wings, my soul shall abide, safely abide forever.
With bowed heads and eyes closed, let's renew the memory of Nolan as we have this benediction. Lord God, we thank you for the life of Nolan. He's brought us many enjoyable times, but he's brought us inspirational times too. And we thank you that you have been with him in his life. And now we pray that you'll be with us also, for we live now in such an uncertain world. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. But under your wings we can abide safely, and we thank you for that. So we pray that you'll give comfort to the families today, that they'll always have fond memories of Nolan, and most of all, they will want to emulate him in the good things that he did and lived during his life. We look forward to the day when we'll see him again. If he was to pray today, Lord, he would pray that every soul here, with their head bowed and thinking of things eternal, he would want them to be in the kingdom of eternity, because he loved people and he loved the Lord. Dismiss us with your blessing, we pray, please, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Two things as we leave this time. There is a book in the foyer that the family have asked for everyone, as many people as possible, to sign, so please don't leave without leaving a thought, a story, signing from you and your family. And then finally, if you make your way down this way, from the foyer in the hall there are some tasty refreshments that have been prepared, and I think we've all earned it now. So continue on the stories, make your way down, connect with the family, and we'll see you down there. Thank you.